thank you. I'm glad to be here this morning. It's nice to be back in Indiana. I wish the humidity was a little lower, but this is spring in Indiana, isn't it? I was asked to talk a little bit about hybrid electric vehicles, electric drive vehicles, and sort of what's different this time. Now, as many of you know, this isn't the first time the United States has tried to introduce electric drive vehicles. Battery electric vehicles date from the beginnings of the auto industry, and at one time they were the major form of vehicle drive on the road. And in fact, it was the Kettering ignition system and the ability to start and operate internal combustion engines more easily that basically pushed them out of the market. So to date, we've made a number of runs at the introduction of electric drive vehicles, and so far they've failed to succeed successfully against the internal combustion engine. So what's the difference this time? First, let me talk a little bit about setting the stage of where we are today. The U.S. imports over half of its petroleum needs from overseas. To do that, we export $1 billion a day to pay for imported oil. That's $1 billion some other countries can use to invest in their economy, in jobs for their people, and improving their standard of living. Now, just to give you a little sense of scale, the Congress and the Obama administration pulled this country back from the brink of a major recession by massive spending in the economy. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act has been spending what we all perceive to be huge amounts of money to stimulate the economy. We've spent $787 billion over a period of about 2 years in economic stimulus. That works out to about $900,000 a day, less than what we ship overseas every day to pay for imported oil. Unless we do something, that our export of $1 billion a day is only going to grow with no end in sight. And the problem is the production of liquid fuels. In this country, this chart was actually about a couple of years old, and today we're actually producing more natural gas than we consume and getting back into the business of exporting natural gas. But you can see the shortfall is in liquid fuels. And transportation is the heart of the problem. 72% of U.S. oil use is for transportation, which is almost completely dependent on petroleum. Of the transportation fuel use, 94% is petroleum, only 6% is alternatives today. And while there's certainly a lot of interest and a lot of focus in alternative sources of liquid fuels, whether from bioproducts or other resources, today that only represents 6% of transportation petroleum oil use. If we can't reduce transportation demand, it's hard to see how we can solve our chronic dependence on oil. The other issue, of course, is price. Everywhere you go, people complain and are concerned about the price of fuel in this country. As it's past $4 a gallon for gasoline, there's growing realization that these prices impact not only individual budgets, but as I mentioned earlier, have implications for the overall U.S. state of the economy. And now, while some of the price fluctuation may be the result of speculation and trading in petroleum, the underlying price trend is the result of supply and demand. And the forecast for demand is steadily upward. If you look at this chart, this is the expected growth in demand for primary oil in various economies around the world between now and 2030. Huge growth predicted in China, India, and the Middle East for oil. Far overwhelming the reduction in demand that's taking place in the U.S., Pacific, and North America. But as petroleum demand continues to grow, prices surely will rise. Now, the goal of the Vehicle Technologies Program at DOE is try to develop technologies that will allow the U.S. to decrease our dependence on petroleum and to reduce the attendant greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation. We're doing that by trying to develop technologies that provide Americans with greater freedom of mobility and to build a set of tools that industry can use to provide more efficient, lower cost transportation. Now, DOE invests in 5 different technology areas: electric vehicles, advanced biofuels, advanced internal combustion engines, since those engines will be around for a very long period of time, natural gas, and hydrogen fuel cells. But today I'm going to focus strictly on electric vehicles. Now, every mile traveled on electricity eliminates the equivalent amount of oil consumption. And particularly since U.S. electricity production uses almost no petroleum. As Bill mentioned earlier, much of our electricity in this area comes from coal, but there is substantial use of natural gas and renewables in electricity production, and the renewables area of electricity production is growing. Transportation electrification, particularly for light-duty vehicles, we see as an attractive pathway for a long-term strategy to reduce petroleum demand. And the administration has been making substantial investments in trying to promote vehicle electrification. This is a chart that sort of explains why. I know you can't read the labels across the bottom axis, but this chart, the blue bars are the petroleum use. The red bar behind it is greenhouse gas emissions. The bar on the far left is today's conventional spark ignition engine as a reference point. As you move to the right, you can see that with the next 2 bars, which are what we see as possibilities for advanced spark ignition and diesel passenger cars, that there are some opportunities for some significant reductions both in petroleum demand and in greenhouse gas emissions. But if you really want to have an impact, if you want to reduce those numbers to less than 50% of where they are today, then you need to focus on those next 6 bars, which are a variety of hybrid electric systems, both conventional hybrids and plug hybrid vehicles. And you can see in those cases, virtually any of those configurations provide over a 50% reduction in petroleum demand and a corresponding reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. But if our objective and our goal is to reduce petroleum consumption, the 2 bars on the right, where the blue bar has disappeared, is fuel cell hybrid electric vehicles and totally electric drive. Those are the approaches that at least for transportation, could completely free us from the use of petroleum. And of course, the reason the greenhouse gas emissions don't go away is because you still have to generate electricity somehow. So here's sort of a vision for U.S. cars. Increasing efficient conventional vehicles, hybrid electric systems, plug-in hybrid drives, and all-electric vehicles, and potentially fuel cells. Now, I honestly don't know how to predict the end state of this development, but I'm sure that the question isn't whether we will have electric drive vehicles, but when. Now, there are really 2 huge challenges in this area today: battery cost and fuel cell cost. Now, batteries cost too much. While prices of batteries have been falling as new technologies have been developed and more manufacturing capacity comes online, battery costs are still a huge impediment to plug-in and all-electric drive vehicles. And as much as all of us hate high fuel prices, those high prices encourage people to buy more efficient hybrid vehicles, increasing demand for batteries, and helping bring battery costs down through increased manufacturing volumes. If fuel prices drop, and they have, as you know, they've been incredibly volatile, that tends to reduce the incentives for customers to purchase efficient vehicles, and suddenly we're back to large, less efficient systems. So much as we hate it, the current high prices are helping this industry.